Hi, welcome to Weekend Review, where we look at some of the news making headlines and look at some of the stories coming up in the coming days. I'm joined today, I'm Phil O'Connor, the Live Enterprise Director. I'm joined today by Rick Green, our Capitol Bureau Chief, from Sports, Darnell Mayberry, and of course our old friend Don Mecoy, our Business Editor. So Rick, let's start with you this week. Mary Fallin's name continues to circulate as a possible member of the Trump administration, and this week we have another Oklahoman who's also popped into the conversations. What's the latest on that?
Right, Attorney General Scott Pruitt, and he met with Trump as well in Trump Tower, and he didn't really make any comment after he emerged from there, but he's reportedly being considered for the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, which is interesting because he's been a real vocal opponent of environmental regulations and has participated in lawsuits against the EPA. So in a sense, I guess he'd be suing himself if he got up there.
And that's been a pattern of a lot of the appointments in the Trump administration are people who essentially are, I don't want to say opponents, but people who have taken a anti-regulatory stand, let's say, are being appointed to be the people to take over the agencies.
True, and Governor Fallin being considered for Interior Secretary also would run afoul of some environmentalists. She would likely get questions during confirmation hearings about the earthquake problem in Oklahoma, the tremendous increase in seismicity that many people have said for a long time is associated with these deep injection wells used by the oil industry. But there's a sense that she's had to be dragged kicking and screaming to this realization. Meanwhile, major quakes have happened in Oklahoma, so she would certainly get questioned on that, as well as the fact that Oklahoma doesn't have a lot of Bureau of Land Management land at all, very, very little, whereas some western states have a lot, and western states typically have been a breeding ground for interior secretaries. So there's a few things that make you wonder about both of those appointments, and yet it's just a big question mark with President-elect Trump. It's some of the rules that might have applied maybe don't right now, so we'll just have to see how it goes.
And then tell me a little bit about what would be should Mary Fallin be appointed, or should Attorney General Pruitt, what would be the process for replacing them?
Well, Lieutenant Governor Todd Lamb would become governor in that scenario, and he would then appoint the lieutenant governor. And that's interesting because Todd Lamb is widely considered a candidate for governor to succeed Fallin, who is serving the second of her 2 4-year terms, second and final. So if she were to get the appointment and he were to become governor, he could theoretically serve for 10 years in that position. And so we'll just see if that should come to fruition.
Would Pruitt also be just someone appointed by the governor would take his place, essentially, or if he was given the position?
That's my understanding. It would be an appointment by the governor to replace him.
Okay. We'll keep looking in. That's a story that we'll keep an eye on. Darnell, big weekend, Bedlam football, not playing the national title in this game, or a chance to play for the national title, but still a lot on the line. What's going on?
Yeah, the Big 12 title is at stake here between Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, obviously. And not only that, but obviously bragging rights as well. So a lot on the line. OU could win the Big 12 title for the first time on Owen Field, the first time they've ever done that. So that'll be sort of icing on the cake for them to be able to do that at home this year. But it's going to be an intriguing matchup. You got two offenses that are really high-powered. Oklahoma with Baker Mayfield, a Heisman Trophy candidate, D.D. Westbrook, another Heisman Trophy candidate at wide receiver, and then the two running backs, Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon. And then on OSU side, you got Mason Rudolph and Justice Hill and James Washington. It's just a lot of firepower. Chris Carson, the running back for OSU. So it should be a high-scoring game. I think the over/under is set at like 90, something like that. It's really high. It might be even more than 90. So a lot of people expect a high-scoring game, not much defense tomorrow morning.
So disappointment on both sides, I'm sure. OSU, I'm guessing, still contends that they only really have one loss and should be talked about for a possible national title appearance. At least a chance to get a shot at it, but that doesn't seem to be in the cards at all. And OU seems to have gotten their game together here in the second half of the season, and yet that also seems to be the national title doesn't seem to be anything that's in their future.
Yeah, the playoff picture is really, really murky for the Big 12 right now, and it's sort of a debate nationally because the Big 10 is going to probably get 2 teams, and there's some talk that they could even get 3, depending on how the chips fall. But they would need a lot of help to get one of those 4 playoff spots, and it just doesn't seem likely at this point. But again, like you said, there's a lot on the line. Regardless of that, the Big 12 title, both teams, whoever wins is going to go on to win the Big 12. They're going to be the Big 12 champion. They're going to go on to the Sugar Bowl and play an SEC team, probably Auburn. But it's a lot on the line, even though they might not be able to get into that top 4.
I guess the consolation prize of having to spend New Year's on New Orleans is, I guess that's okay.
Yeah.
Don, big week for oil.
Oh, yeah.
Prices are up. People are smiling. Some barons are richer.
Yes.
So,
well, on Wednesday, OPEC came out and they got their deal done. They'd been over a month ago, the OPEC had said we're going to cut production. But then they had to figure out how their members, who don't always get along and don't always do what they're supposed to do according to OPEC rules, were going to cut production. But they got a deal done, and they got the Russians to buy in. And yeah, the oil prices immediately soared up over $50 a barrel, which we hadn't seen that for a while. And that was reflected in the price of some of our local stocks. We saw Continental Resources, which is a huge company here in Oklahoma City that really specializes in oil. Their stock price went up almost 25% that same day. And Harold Hamm, who's the CEO and chairman of that company and who owns most of the stock of that company, made a few $1 billion that morning on paper the next morning. So
when oil goes up like this, we've been through the crisis where it was down, and we saw what the impacts were of that: layoffs, drills being laid down, rigs being laid down. What would we anticipate with oil back up around $50 a barrel? I mean, if it stays at that level, do we expect to see hiring by oil companies at that point? Do we expect to see exploration expand?
We do expect to see some expansion and exploration. They've talked about that. The jobs might come a little more slowly because the cuts were so big and so painful for a lot of companies that they're reluctant to hire back in some of those positions. So that may happen a little more slowly. But I think we will see, and we've heard some of these companies and some of these executives say, we're going to increase our drilling budget in 2017. We've seen just in the drilling reports that are filed that there's a little more activity now. Our rig count is still way down from where it was, say, in 2014, but we're seeing some more activity, in part because there's some plays in Oklahoma that are inexpensive for these companies. They can be profitable at these lower prices, so they're going to get in there and drill and produce and sell that stuff, and because it's profitable for them. It's not as expensive to drill in the Scoop and the Stack down in south central Oklahoma.
And do people believe that it'll stay at this level for a while now with this agreement with OPEC?
Well, you can't.
Or it's oil.
It's oil. Yeah. Well, it's a fungible commodity. But I just like to say that. But it's OPEC they've had their members in the past just decide we're not going to fulfill our obligations. We're not going to do what we promised, and that happens, and the thing falls apart, and everybody starts pumping like crazy again, and that could affect the prices. If they do it, and they were, you have to remember, these OPEC countries were hurting too. They didn't like. They did this because this shale revolution that happened in the United States, and we became one of the biggest producers because we got really good at this. They were trying to punish some of these companies, and they did. But at the same time, they've been living with low oil prices too. So they do have some incentive to try and boost the price of oil. And if that stays, I've heard all kinds of predictions. Yeah, this is a level we're going to be at. No, by the end of the year we'll be up to $60 a barrel, and but projecting oil is a very inexact science.
Yeah. Well, at least for those who've been able to hang on through the whole catastrophe of the crash and everything that's ensued, maybe this is some sunny news for them.
Yeah, I think people in the industry are pretty pleased with where things are right now and where they expect they're going to go.
Right. Okay, listen, these are the kinds of stories that you can only get at News OK, that you can only read in the Oklahoman. Pick up a paper, subscribe, check us out on the website. Love to have you see our content. We'll see you again next week. Thanks a lot.